So there's a great big discount box of shiny new Space Marines in big armour coming out. And while the Saturnine box set is aimed for the Horus Heresy, is it possible to make this work for an army in Warhammer 40K? Hello and welcome back to Warspec Tactics, where today I thought we'd revisit the Saturnine box set, and this time specifically looking at how well it can be made to work for the Enforcers of the Imperium or Chaos in the 41st Millennium. As I'm sure most people watching are aware by now, the Saturnine box set is the big launch box for the Horus Heresy 3rd edition, containing a whole bunch of new miniatures, plus the rulebook for the game. The release date is the 26th of July, so it's basically going for pre-order on Saturday the 12th. Hopefully the supply of this one should be considerably better than the majority of Battle Force boxes out there for 40k. They generally tend to do better with edition launch boxes, and this one's going to be a more regular range item, not just a one and done. So hopefully people should be able to get it, and the pricing should be £195, so $315 or €245. That's the same price as the previous Age of Darkness box set, and in a similar sort of vein it's far more expensive than the majority of big boxes for Warhammer, but it still looks like it's a comparatively good discount, at least compared with buying things separately. If you are looking to pick it up and are based in Canada, the video sponsor Toy Snowman might be able to help with that. They're going to have some at 15% off. A link down in the video description are all the channel's affiliate discount retailers. There's 15% off for Wargame Portal in the USA, 16 for Tash and Geldeep in the EU, 15 for Element Games in the UK, and 21 for Gap Games in Australia. They should be going up for pre-order at these times, usually midnight Eastern Time in North America, 10 AM in the UK, 11 in Europe, and midday Eastern Time in Australia. If you did want to support the channel while picking it up, any purchases through the links do help support Warspec Tactics, so a big thank you for that if you did happen to be buying anyway. I think one of the reasons that people are interested in adapting the Saturnine box set for 40k was that the previous Age of Darkness box was really quite good for it. Every model inside it had a very direct proxy in the 41st Millennium. The characters could be all manner of things, maybe captains or chaos lords the most obvious. The tactical marines could be legionaries, tactical marines or intercessors. The Terminators obviously Terminators. The Contemptor could work for a Hellbrute or Venerable Dreadnought, or the Legends rules for the Contemptor. The Spartan could either be used as a Land Raider or a Spartan again with Legends rules. Not everything was perfectly one for one, but I think if you had an entire army built in that theme, it'd be obvious enough what was what. What was quite nice about it is that if you liked the retro heresy style look, it could get you a fairly impressive amount of points on the board, around about 1500 points worth of miniatures, so around 5 points per dollar. Generally that's really on the high side, even for Space Marines, and you could potentially make the deal better by selling bits of it that you didn't want, potentially the Age of Darkness big rulebook if you didn't want to play Heresy. I think that was one of the other attractions though, the idea that you could use the miniatures both for 40k and Heresy if you had the mind to. So the question is whether or not Saturnine can do similar. I think lots of 40k collectors will be very tempted to pick it up. It's got lots of really quite cool new models. Not literally everyone is sold on the Terminators in a big way. They certainly don't look particularly unpopular when I've told people about them. Maybe the Dreadnought being the absolute pick of the box for some. I would say that there's not quite so many direct crossovers to 40k this time around, or at least not without a bit of work, though I feel like there's definitely enough that's interesting. Here's the contents of the box: the Praetor and Centurion, 40 Mark II Tactical Marines, 6 Saturnine Terminators and a Saturnine Dreadnought, a great big Araknae quad accelerator platform, the disintegration weapon sprue to upgrade the Tactical Marines with, and then the paper and rulebook. From a previous video I did, it does look like the discount is going to be fairly solid this time around as well, around about the same sort of level as the previous Age of Darkness by my estimations versus what they might be sold separately. It looks like if you bought all of this separately from Games Workshop, it would be around about half off. Though I guess those good discount figures would drop down a bit if you're not using literally everything. Say for example if you couldn't use the Heresy rulebook and weren't bothered about reselling it for example. Let's go through the miniatures one by one and talk about how they could be applied. The single most obvious one are the Crusade Armour Space Marines. These are about the single most obvious one, basic guys with bolters, something both the Loyalists and Heretics have, and the fun sort of industrial knightly helm things I feel like could be appropriate enough for some legions or chapters. I feel like they do well for Death Guard or the appropriately painted Iron Warriors here, or maybe nice enough for Iron Hands or something from the Loyalists. For these ones, for the Chaos Space Marines, I guess it would just be Legionaries. It's maybe not quite as ideal for them, given that they'd be armed with bolters, which are pretty suboptimal at the moment. They could be used as bases for kit bashing though, potentially getting some of the Heresy upgrade sprues if you really wanted to, though I guess that would increase some cost. Maybe if you've already got a particularly good amount of spare Chaos Space Marine weapons or something, you might be able to kit bash some of them with different gear. For the Loyalist Space Marines, it feels like they've got more options. They could just be fielded as regular tactical marines. Again, maybe some conversions with some heavy weapons might not be the worst there. but they're really quite big chunky models as well. I feel like it wouldn't be that much of a stretch to count them as primaries. I guess their bolt guns aren't quite as big as the bolt rifles, but they're clearly just Space Marines with bolters either way, and the disintegration weapons could have some interesting options as well, maybe fielded as either Hellblasters or Infernus Marines. Next up, we've got one of the star centerpieces of the box, and that's the Saturnine Dreadnought. This guy was perhaps the thing that people were most interested in. It's the single biggest Dreadnought in Warhammer 40K now. It has a great big plasma cannon on one side and a disintegration weapon on the other, plus some secondary weapons. For the size comparison, it does mean it wants to be representing something at least fairly chunky. It's maybe not really so different in size from the Leviathan Dreadnought besides the great big shoulder pads it's got, maybe looking a bit bulkier versus the Derridio here though. As with the Leviathan, it's not so different to the Redemptor Dreadnought either, and that one has a plasma cannon as well. You just have to convert the other gun into a fist maybe. It also feels fairly stylistically similar to the Custodes Telemon Dreadnought as well. I guess for the options for the Loyalists, you could use it as a Ballistas Dreadnought, as that's essentially a ranged Redemptor, so it could fit fairly well with that. The guns don't map on particularly well though, I'd say. That one's got las cannon and missiles, whereas this one doesn't. I guess you'd either run it as a proxy or convert something. As mentioned, the Redemptor could be good to convert one arm with a fist, or maybe run it using the Legends Leviathan datasheet with some combinations of the ranged weapons that has. For Chaos, that might also be one of the better options. Maybe in Codex, you could perhaps think about a Forge Fiend, I guess. I guess that's also a walker with some big heavy guns, and the plasma gun could represent multiple ectoplasma cannons perhaps. It does have quite a different profile though, and it's mounted on a slightly bigger oval base versus the 100mm one that the Saturnine Dreadnought is on. Before we move on to talk Terminators and the rest, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Toy Snowman, a gaming store in Canada. They're one option to buy Warhammer 40K over there. They've got a whole range of other stuff, but maybe for main relevance to you guys, they sell Warhammer products at 15% off Games Workshop's prices. They're based here in Montreal in Canada, and here's a picture of their store. They generally do all the things you expect of an online retailer, selling at that big 15% discount, and combining shipping and getting free shipping over $150 Canadian. The website's generally straightforward to search and easy to find stuff. If they happen to have a Games Workshop product that isn't in stock, then you can back order it through them, so still get the 15% discount and they order it in from Games Workshop. And they've got a loyalty rewards program as well for some additional discounts. Relevant for this one, they'll certainly be aiming to stock good numbers of the Saturnine box, again at their 15% discount rate, so you could consider checking them out at the weekend if you're in Canada. In any case though, there'll be links down in the video description, and a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. Back to the box contents though, and next up we have the Saturnine Terminators, the namesake of the box itself with their great big shoulder pads, a very retro Terminator design reimagined. Not everyone likes them, but for a lot of people they've really hit the mark. The Terminators are really quite enormous bulky ones. They're on 50mm bases, and they have 3 different weapon options. Each of them can be armed with twin disintegration weapons, twin plasma bombards, and can have one power fist. Compared with the Cataphracta Terminators that came in the last box, these guys are significantly bigger versus regular Space Marine Terminators, even compared with the big upscale chunky Indomitus ones from Leviathan. They just absolutely tower over them and are mounted on bigger bases as well. I feel like they'd feel a bit more clunky as proxies for those versus other things really. For the Loyalists, maybe the single most obvious thing seems to be Centurions. They're also on 50mm bases, and I feel like the size is close enough. The Saturnines are a little bit taller. But again, I feel like the weapon loadout doesn't really track on amazingly well once more. I feel like I'd be most tempted to want to field them as las cannon and missile Centurions, again neither of which the Saturnine Dreadnoughts have. I guess maybe you could think of the disintegration weapon as the grav cannon and the plasma bombard to represent their chest-mounted missile profile. Feels like their damage profile maybe isn't too dissimilar to plasma. I guess the other option would be converting in some way, though that's going to take time and potentially more money. For the Chaos though, I feel like they've got a much more obvious direct counter-as. Seems like the obvious choice for them is to run them as Obliterators. They seem about as direct as you could want. They're both on 50mm bases, they're great big chunky guys with loads of armour and a whole bunch of wounds. And the Obliterators guns tend to be a bit more free form, with a whole bunch of funky profiles that don't really represent any one thing. And that does seem nice enough for just maybe equipping a bunch of Saturnine Terminators, perhaps with 1 plasma and 1 disintegrator. You could completely go to town on them if you have a bunch of Chaos bits left over though. It would be really cool to see these completely mutated and warped up, maybe sprouting a few more guns or mutations. Just using them as is seems pretty reasonable though. Both the stat line and the ability to teleport tracks really well, and the plasma bombard's supposed to be an indirect fire weapon which also works with the Obliterator's special rule. For the guy leading them, there's the Saturnine Praetor. I believe he's on a 50mm base size, judging with size comparison to the nearby Terminators, though he is enormous and made more so by that tactical rock. Base size, I believe that's making the right size for the Terminator captain, even if he is a fair bit chunkier. He is beefier than the current Chaos Terminator Lord though, who's currently on a 40mm base. Though I feel like that's not the end of the world for more casual games if you're not trying to gain advantages from it. With the size of the model though, I feel like you could run him as bigger stuff. You could maybe run him as a Loyalist Primarch, maybe the Lion or Guilliman if you really wanted to. They're on 60mm bases and aren't significantly bigger in terms of size and stature, or even for a slightly more weird and out there take, it's not really significantly smaller than a Loyalist Venerable Dreadnought. Again, if you put him on a 60mm base, you could basically have him count as an 8 wound toughness 9 vehicle. The reroll aura also works sort of well as a captain, I suppose. For Chaos, he could be a reasonable enough proxy for Abaddon the Despoiler, but run for another Legion, or maybe be taken as a Demon Prince on foot. Both of those are on 60mm bases, and again I feel like with the size of the model that wouldn't be too inappropriate to mount him on one of those. Overall I feel like there's really quite a lot of good use options for him. Next up we have the Mark II Centurion. He's got a power mace and combi weapon, and like most Space Marine characters I feel like there's lots of ways that you could use him. A Captain or Chaos Lord seems like the single most obvious, maybe could be done as a Dark Apostle or Chaplain with the mace, or could be used as a Lieutenant or Warpsmith, or quite a few other things. Quite a lot of character choices can't take a combi weapon, though it could just be for show, and maybe wouldn't be the hardest model in the world to convert to something else if you wanted to. Finally, and perhaps the single least obvious thing to translate to 40k is the Araknae Quad Accelerator platform. It's just really quite an enormous static gun and just not really too like just about anything else. There's Legends rules for things like Tarantula batteries, but they're far smaller. Potentially you could just use it as some fancy scatter terrain to liven up a board. I feel like everything else is going to be maybe a bit of a stretch. You could perhaps use it as some tank profile or another and just choose not to move it. You could maybe assemble it with the turrets not on the platform and mount on the back of a Rhino or something like that, but then that's going to require another purchase. You could maybe just about get away with using it as a Space Marine Hammerfall bunker. Again, different weapon profiles, but maybe seems like one of the more obvious things. Weirdly enough, I feel like it might actually work quite well to count as 2 Fire Strike turrets. Just use the profiles and imagine you have 2 of them side by side, and when one's destroyed it loses half its firepower. Wouldn't be something you could do at any tournaments or things, but doesn't seem like the most unreasonable thing for a casual game. Putting that all together, and maybe with a bit of either conversion work or proxying, this might be what you could wind up for a Loyalist army. Perhaps a Captain in Terminator armour, use the Centurion as a Lieutenant, 4 sets of 5 Intercessors for the Tactical Marines, 2 sets of 10 Hellblasters for the Disintegration weapons, 2 units of 3 Devastator Centurions with the Saturnine Terminators, a Redemptor Dreadnought with finding something useful to proxy for a Power Fist, and the big gun being slightly unorthodox and counting as 2 Fire Strike turrets side by side. If doing that, then you'd have around about a 1600 points worth of Space Marines, that would come with the downsides of either needing to do a fair bit of work with either proxying or converting. And if you're doing proxying things, you'd probably have to be very clear as to what counts as what to your opponent at the start of the game. The alternative for Chaos, for this one I've used the Praetor as Abaddon the Despoiler, then a Chaos Lord for the Centurion, and 4 sets of 10 Legionaries, maybe trying to find some additional gear to arm them with. The Saturnine Terminators are 3 sets of 2 Obliterators, where I feel like they fit rather well, and then the Saturnine Dreadnoughts using the Legends rules for Leviathan, though as mentioned maybe a Forge Fiend could be a fallback choice. I've just left the big gun off for this one, though if you did manage to do something like that, that'd be a fairly considerably sized Chaos army at around 1750 points. Overall, for trying to make it work for 40k, it does feel like it's going to be a bit more of a stretch versus the previous Age of Darkness box with a Spartan in it. It feels like whether you go for either Chaos or a Loyalist, there are going to be certain things that just don't track super well, even if there are several things that work pretty fine. If you could manage to make it work though, there is the potential for around about 1500 points worth of Space Marines there of one sort or another. There still might not necessarily be the single best option depending on how much extra work or money you might need to spend to make it serviceable. For one other take, you could consider aiming for part of the box set, maybe one that you found more useful than another. Perhaps say for Chaos Space Marines you could buy the box, and then you could resell the big gun and the Horus Heresy rulebook, potentially focusing down a bit on the bits that you actually want, or you could do the reverse of that. I'm sure plenty of people will be buying Saturnine and selling the kits on individually, either for bits that they don't want, or people trying to make some profit. That could genuinely be the more efficient way to get your hands on some of these. In particular, I suspect the Tactical Marines, with so many of them in the box set, I suspect that they'll go really quite cheap online for a good while. Otherwise, you could wait until Games Workshop release some of the rest and get them solo when they do. Obviously then you're not getting any sort of discount, but it could still be interesting enough for certain purposes. It looks like the Saturnine Terminators might be in a box of 6, and that could be 6 Obliterators for Chaos Space Marines in one go. Seems unlikely that isn't going to be a good deal in terms of money for the points, if you did want to use their models as obliterators perhaps. In any case though, I'll certainly be interested if anyone is thinking about buying this and trying to adapt for 40k. What are your plans for the box set, and are there any other creative uses that I've not thought of? Let me know down in the comments. As mentioned, a big thank you to Toy Snowman for sponsoring this one. You can check them out, links down in the video description below, and they should have Saturnine boxes at a good 15% off. The other channel discount retailers around the world will also have them at these times as well, and as ever, just an absolutely massive thank you to anyone picking up the box sets through these, if you did happen to be getting one anyway. I'll leave that there for now though. If you'd like to see more like this, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you'd like to support the channel more directly, the channel has a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description, and channel patrons do get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case though, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.